I'll go ahead and get this session started for tonight. I believe it's 5:30. I want to thank everybody for coming today and welcome. And as I always start out by saying, love to see this building, this meeting room full, because the more full it is, the better we're doing our job for the most part. Some bad, some good, but for the most part, I think this system is doing an excellent job. I'll forego the silence for a moment, and then we'll start out with a pledge. So if everybody would stand and raise the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Yes, we can call over.
Caruso. Here. Daniel.
Here.
Dryden.
Here.
Hartsfield.
Here.
Jacobs.
Here.
Mabry.
Here.
Nodert.
Here.
Rochelle.
Here.
Weathers.
Here.
9 present.
Thank you. In recent past, I believe Senate or somebody above us in Tennessee, they adopted a law that gave the public that comes to these open meetings to speak pertaining to what's on the agenda for the night. And tonight, the agenda is for safety and policies regarding transportation. And unfortunately, and I think that was a great policy that they adopted, to have just the community to speak, say what's on their mind, just to get their voices out there. And I really I welcome that. And tonight's I believe is one of the first nights we will have community involvement. And I think I've got 3 here that petition to want to speak, and 1 that's just here for just questions and answers if this needs to be. So just to lay the ground rule or the thing, the whole session or the whole public conference is 30 minutes. Whether I have 1, I have 10, or I have 200, it lasts 30 minutes. Now, if the board sees that we need longer than 30 minutes, we can make a motion to vote as a whole to extend that 30 minutes. If not, we'll be cutting it off at 30 minutes. That's not to say you take off 30 minutes, 2, 3, whatever, but the whole community involvement is 30 minutes.
Each speaker.
And
Each speaker gets 5 minutes.
okay, so and to break that down, each speaker could have 5 minutes. So the first one tonight, I think it was Corey Tays. Corey Tays, come on up, please.
We weren't sure what to expect here, so I really just filled it out. We didn't know if you might ask us questions as bus drivers, and didn't know if we had to fill that out just to be able to speak. So that's why I filled that out. But I mean, I will take a moment and say I teach and drive a bus, so I see things through lots of different eyes, and I'm really thankful for our boss and what he does for us. And but if there's anything I can answer for you tonight, I will be more than happy to.
Thank you. The next one was Robert Gilling. Thank you for coming, Robert.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, board members. I don't know really what all this meeting's about. I just use rules and regulations, and I know Josh, I feel like he's done a good job, and I'll back him on everything he does, but the whole entire school system, I feel like we're looked down upon as far as discipline. You know, we got a lot of discipline problems. You got a lot of bus drivers. You're blessed to have the bus drivers that y'all do. because y'all don't have to worry about it. You can turn the TV on, see everybody, bus drivers, you know, his concerns and all, and we just, we're getting full of it. You got 4 or 5 in Summertown that can go anytime, can retire anytime. And it seems like the school system, the school board, say y'all we don't feel like y'all doing nothing to help us as far as getting more people. Sometimes we can't take off, you know, we ain't got no subs, you know. We got tier 2 drivers, but they can't drive one route at a time. And it's getting disgusting, and the kids, to me, parenting is an all-time low. And we see it every day, and the buses is full, and we just need help. I don't know, it's you know, it's a liability issue for me, it's a liability issue for y'all, because, you know, I'm telling y'all now, we need help. And I don't know what it'd take to get help, but we need help. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Penny Hill. Thank you for coming, Ms. Hill.
Thank you for letting us speak. There are 157 private roads in Lawrence County. There are policies in place for all of this. The bus drivers just want the policies upheld. And we would like to invite each and every one of you to come and get on a bus with us. If you ride a bus with us, morning and afternoon, just one time, I believe each and every one of you would understand more about what we go through, about what the roads are. We let kids off at apartment complexes. We can't watch them all the way to their apartment. It's just what we have to do. We can't get buses in there. We have roads we cannot go down. That's just the way it is. We don't have any other way around it. We have to let kids off to walk. But like I said, we would very much enjoy y'all coming and get on a bus with us. Just once.
We might take you up on that one day.
Thank you.
That'd be good. And last, I think Suzanne Kane, she just writes any questions needed to be for bus drivers, so. Thank you, Ms. Kane.
I didn't plan to talk, but I know I'm the only sub in the county. Got rid of my license this summer because I had enough, but Josh needed somebody to drive. So I went back, cost me $100, got my license back. I know people that have driven the day of their parents' funeral because there's no subs. And it's not even funny at all. And you need to look at the bereavement policy when y'all ever get to that. It's pretty sad when we get one day a year. If my mama dies and my daddy dies, I get one day between the two of them. That needs to be taken care of too. But we need help with the routes. And if you start going on all these other roads, my husband drove the route of the road that y'all brought up last time, and he never went down that road. Those people need to deal with whoever that subdivision was. I don't care if there was a divorce involved, whatever. There's a civil suit there if they can't work with that. That should not be y'all's problem to have to get those roads on the agenda or made public. If y'all try to cover the 157 private roads, y'all gonna really be in trouble looking for drivers. But we do need some help.
Thank you. Are there any other ones? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 1.
I'm a parent, I'll speak.
Yeah, come on up. Won't you do 5 minutes?
I'll give you guys a couple of solutions too. I don't come from Lawrence County, I come from Phoenix, Arizona.
So, coming from Phoenix, Arizona, we have a totally different way of doing bus systems. I think personally, some of the parents out here are a little spoiled. I love the fact, okay, that yeah, we get front door service from y'all, all right? It's great. But if you guys would lower the bus routes down to main places and require parents of certain ages, such as elementary, kindergarten, we were required to be there for our kindergarten students to pick them up, to ensure that they got into the hands of their parents. But, so we live out in county. If the parents would take the time to go down to maybe Self-Smart, drop their kids off at the county community building, we could have 2-3 buses sitting there waiting. That right there covers our entire area. And that way you can go from there to the elementary school to bus those kids. So if we would have stationed bus routes, stationed pickups, because on my road, I'm going to tell you right now, I have so far had, and not just by my bus, but I have had almost 9 animals killed on my road of my own. We've lost 2 dogs. We lost a dog literally the Christmas after we moved here. It was devastating. And the people fly up and down my road. It is almost unsafe for my daughter to get on and off that bus in front of my house. They don't stop. They don't care. We've had the sheriffs out there. They wait for them to leave. And then they're right back to 60, 70 miles an hour coming up and down that road. There are certain times, just this year, approximately 2 days ago, we had a tree fall down off of Piney Road. It was sitting in the middle of the road. I said, there's no way that that bus is going to be able to make it past that if it sees it in time before it hits that. That's an accident waiting to happen. So if we had centrally located bus stations to pick the kids up and drop them off, that would alleviate the shortage, because we would have one bus route, one bus driver. We could get so many kids onto one bus instead of dropping them off at their houses. I mean, I know that that's a hardship for some parents, but it is a solution. I mean, sometimes we got to kind of turn things around a little bit and stop spoiling everybody. And like I said, I love my front door service, but I'm willing to give that up for the safety of my child and for the safety of the bus routes, to get better bus drivers in there. I think they need as far as I'm concerned, I think they need a pay raise. That is a huge thing for me. I don't know how we go about that, but I think we raised the wages of our subs for school. We need to raise the wages of our bus drivers to get better quality bus drivers in there. Right now, we're kind of stuck with, at some points, we're stuck with what we've got. So sometimes we don't want to get rid of somebody who's kind of bending the rules or is just a safety hazard. So, like I said, we had stationed bus routes. Those kids, if you weren't there, you literally had 2 minutes. That bus would sit and wait. So you also have parents that can rely on a schedule if you have scheduled bus routes. I knew that I had to be at that bus route at 6:15, or that bus 2 minutes from then was leaving. If they got there early, it gave the bus driver a little bit of a break to sit back and wait till they went to their next stop. So that gives them a little bit of a break. They're at a gas station. They can get off the bus, use the restroom. I know that's probably a huge thing, just simply being able to use the restroom. My husband's a truck driver, I know. So you've got, you can schedule stops, you can schedule routes. The parents are just going to have to start to learn how to change and comply out here. I understand it's hard when you got to go to work at 6 in the morning, but when the bus doesn't run, the kids go to school anyway. How does that happen? We adjust.
Thank you very much. I didn't get your name.
My name is Misty Hurler.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. If you would, please, we have forms on that table right there. If you would fill that out,
I can
just
do
for
that.
our purposes,
Absolutely.
and give it back to us. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, am I allowed to ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Ma'am,
Yes, sir.
in the afternoon, taking them back to that bus stop, can you share, was there a penalty for the parents not being there to pick up that child in the afternoon, or what was the penalty?
If the parent wasn't there to pick up the child,
In the afternoon? You
In the
when they dropped
afternoon.
them off, they're supposed to be there out there. What was the penalty out there for?
the bus didn't wait. We were there. With the high school students, they were responsible for watching their brothers and sisters, as they are now. As far as the younger children, that bus would stay there and wait. If the sheriff has to be called, the sheriff has to be called. They would either call the law or they would call DCS. It's just like leaving your child at school. Because we had parents that would actually do that. They would be a half hour, 2 hours late to pick their child up. That is when DCS ends up getting involved, because that's neglect. You cannot leave your child at school for an extra 2 hours. They're not a babysitter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Moving on to the policy items for consideration, discussion, and action. Mr. Atkins.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our folks who spoke tonight. Since our August board meeting, we've conducted surveys of the administrators, bus drivers, and directors from around the state, asking them several questions, and I've shared that information with the board. You know the responses. We've also provided the transportation policies to you. You have those, and tonight you will also have some suggestions to policy changes, just cleaning up a few things. Mr. Cagle is here as well to answer any questions, give guidance, to help us navigate through this process. The purpose of all that was to provide the board with as many views to the challenges that we face, the struggles that Mr. Rogers and bus drivers deal with daily, and the concerns of the board. We recently conducted a survey of LCSS asking for their input. What can we do differently? What can we do to help increase pay? How do we recruit more drivers? And I will be working on that to get to the board here in the next weekly update. So all that's been provided to the board to help you inform discussion, make any recommendations. Dr. Mabry has offered up 4 suggestions, and I think the board has received those in the weekly update. Mr. Daniel asked for some clarification in policy, and I made that change, and it was some redundancy in the policy that he asked to clean up, and I think you've seen that as well. That was about a parent note, if I remember correctly. Mr. Daniel, parent note.
Well, Mr. Atkins, the documents that were provided to the board in front of us tonight does not show those changes.
Okay.
Now, the ones you sent us afterwards electronically did show those changes, but yeah, it was the bus and safety conduct, and also that had most of the redundancy in it. Page 2 or 3, lines 10 through 26 were just restated lines that were on the first page. And then the other questions I brought up was on the care of school property.
Yes.
They're at the last paragraph of that, so it was 6.311, Jessica. You know, we spell out if anybody damages bus seats, you know, as we're talking about transportation, whatever, then their grades or whatever's going to be held, their diploma would be held unless they do voluntary work program for the minor, and upon completion of the work or the student's grades and diploma and transcript shall be released. So I just posed the question, so what happens if that work isn't complete? We don't have anything in the policy about so they don't do that.
But the information that we made the adjustments to was shared with the board in a weekly update. It just, maybe the wrong document is on here.
Yes,
We didn't add the highlighted areas.
I believe that is correct. I do recall reading through your the updates to that.
And so all that information, again, has been given to the board. You've seen it, and all of it was designed to help you make an informed decision, to know the challenges that not only Lawrence County faces, but other district faces, and how we are in compliance with so many, what other districts are doing. We're very similar, and in many cases, we do a little bit more than a lot of districts. I think you can see that from directors across the state and their input. So I wanted the board to have all that up on the front end so you would be able to make informed decisions. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
So at this time, I believe I'm going to turn it over to board members and see if they have any questions or kind of give me some guidance of where we need to go from here. So I'll start. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Michael or Mr. Cable at this time? Go ahead.
I guess I'll start it off. Mr. Cagle, thank you for coming. We certainly appreciate your guidance in this. And let me say before I start, I recognize, as does every member of the board, the contribution bus drivers are making to the children of this county. That's not a question. The problem that I have is the practice of letting students off the bus to walk home. Now, the question for Mr. Cagle: do you feel that a school bus is a continuation of school in a student's day?
The answer to that question is yes, it is. It has a boundary, but yes, it is a continuation of the service, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you said that. That's how I feel. And I taught school, and we held students accountable on field trips, overnight trips, whenever, away ball games. So that is my thinking on this. Now, I would refer you to Tennessee Code Title 49, Education 49-6-2101, subsection G, concerning hazard zones. Now, if the school bus is a continuation of a school day, then this code is talking about students walking to and from school. Okay? Now, from among other things, it addresses those children that are walking. And it's talking about, in a hazard zone, there are no sidewalks, a 4-lane highway is present, an intersection where no right turn is prohibited, one or more sexual offenders live in the area, or any other hazardous condition exists. Now, subsection G states, each LEA is encouraged to conduct an investigation to determine if any hazardous zones are present within all walking routes children commonly utilize going to and returning from schools. Now, I understand the wear and tear on school buses. I understand the extra time it may take to see that that child is safely home. But we have to prioritize things in this county. The state sets minimum guidelines. It encourages, or does not discourage, the local school boards from increasing or going above minimum state standards. Now, I recognize the fact that Mr. Atkins asked other directors of schools in other counties, and their responses were much like our policy and state code. But those school board members in Giles, Murray, Lincoln, Lewis are responsible for their children. We are responsible here. I don't think at any point in time finances should be the deciding factor. I realize we have private roads. I realize some of our roads are in bad shape. You can go right down here at the railroad trestle in Lawrenceburg, drive to Walmart going north. If you're not careful, you'll knock your front end out of line from the manhole covers. But that does not, in my opinion, relieve me as a school board member to do everything I possibly can to ensure the safety of these kids. Now, in our policy that we have, 6.308, it agrees in things that you have just said. It is an extension of school activities, line 4 and 5. It also says that if a child is removed from a school bus or exit a school bus, someone has to ensure the security of that child and safety for the remainder of that trip home. Is that a fair thing for us to have in our policy?
Well, let me just say you're not required to do that under the law. And let me start out with a general theory, and I'll get to your question immediately. There's a case right on point on this matter, and it's called Bowers versus the City of Chattanooga. This comes from the day when the City of Chattanooga actually had a school system. I may be the only person in the room who remembers that, but but the Chattanooga City Schools actually existed. Michael Bowers lived on a side street off Macaulay Avenue. And if you know anything about Macaulay Avenue in Chattanooga, you know it's the Indy 500. It's a one-way street that goes from Dodds Avenue all the way downtown, and it is just a mess down through there most of the time. The Chattanooga City Board of Education changed the transportation policy, but didn't bother telling anybody about it. And on a usual and customary day, Michael Bowers' grandmother would meet him at his let-off point. She would meet him there, walk him across Macaulay Avenue, and go home. Well, on the day that the accident occurred, the school bus driver didn't stop on Macaulay Avenue. He stopped on a side street. He was early because the routes had changed. Michael Bowers' grandmother wasn't there, and Michael was hit on Macaulay Avenue. He just ran out in the traffic. He thought that's what he usually did, and he was hit on Macaulay Avenue. Fortunately, not very seriously injured, nevertheless hit and injured. Bowers versus the City of Chattanooga changed the legal standard for school board members and public officials in Tennessee with regard to policy. And it's a discretionary act whether or not this board has a policy. Nothing compels you to have a policy on transportation unless the law says you have to have one. That's the only time. But there's nothing that compels you to have the policy. However, once you get that policy, it's the planning operational test that matters, and that's created by Judge Franks and approved by the state Supreme Court. The planning operational test is, let's plan the policy. Now, operational test is when you hand it to the director of schools and his staff, and they put it into action, into enforcement. And at that point, you are responsible for what happens. You as a board, not you individually. The Board of Education is responsible. We represent 70 or so school districts. I represent only one that doesn't have a transportation department. They don't provide school transportation. They are very happy there, as you might imagine. Bus driver shortages are everywhere, everywhere. And it's if we could clone these folks, we would do it. But there's a sign even as you go into Bedford County that at the community school right there that says, if you want to be a bus driver, call this number. Call this number. And I've looked at that sign 3 or 4 times already this year because that's how serious the bus driver shortage is. I don't have a single school district out of the 70 or so that we represent that gives what I refer to as Uber service. Uber service would be door-to-door service. In fact, I live in a community that's made up of cul-de-sacs. And if you try to get that bus down the end of the cul-de-sac, you're going to have to back it out because there's no place down there to turn it, no place wide enough to turn it around. So for that reason, all the parents walk their children out to the end of the cul-de-sac, and that's where the children are boarded and where they exit the bus every day. And there's usually 2 or 3 parents there who are with their children and basically making sure that the other children don't run out into the street. We have something similar to that along country roads everywhere. Where does your liability start and where does it end? Your liability starts once that child reaches that bus stop under the law as we know it. Now, if you wish to assume liability further back than that, from the time they close the door of their house to the bus stop, you may do so. You can have a policy that says we're going to pick up everybody, we're going to be responsible. But generally, under the law, your liability begins once that child reaches that bus, that location. Many of us remember those little huts that we used to build on the side of the road out of plywood where kids could go sit out of bad weather, inclement weather, and wait on a bus to arrive. I've had to litigate, defend school boards in cases that we have fights that occur at those bus stops. And the parents say, well, he's not at school yet. Well, that's a school-controlled location. So our liability, our legal liability begins at that bus stop, wherever we designate that bus stop to be. It ends when that child exits the bus that day at that stop and the bus pulls away. That's legally where it is. Now again, if this board wishes to create a policy where you assume liability for more than that, you may do so. You may do so. But understand that you're going to be held liable for that policy if you create it. That's going to be that operational side of Bowers versus Chattanooga. So those are the limitations, and the law. I think the law has been very gracious to us in that regard. Many school districts have a policy that say if your child is left on school campus before this hour, that child is not supervised, and that's because parents do leave for work early, and they'll drop a child off at a schoolhouse, and that child will sit outside for a great amount of time. And they publish a policy that says we open the doors. This building is manned from this hour to this hour, and if your child is left on campus, then you assume the liability for that. Again, this board gets to set the policy with regard to that. And it's, I would, let me stop there. I know that's an answer to your question. I know you got other questions. Let me stop there and let's move ahead.
Okay, you ready for another one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is not hearsay. I was informed on Friday before Labor Day that a bus was stopping and allowing children to get off and walk almost 2/10 of a mile down a 2-lane road that used to be a state route. It is now a county route. And Tuesday, following the Labor Day holiday, I was sitting in the driveway watching.
Yep.
That bus stopped. The 5 children got off, 2 older children. One of the little children was very young. One of the older children was holding their hand, and you know how little children are. They walked down, and the bus driver left. They walked down the 2-lane road, and cars were putting on their brake lights, getting in the southbound lane to avoid the children. Then the children walked across the 2-lane road to their house. The bus driver had left. By the time I got past the house, going down the hill, I had Mr. Atkins on the phone. And I told him of this circumstance. He graciously made time to come out, and we rode that triangle 3 times, looking for a place that the bus could turn around. It was decided later on, the bus go on up to another road, turn, come back down, and the door was facing the house that the children got on and off. That situation was solved. But I personally saw these cars, and when Mr. Atkins stopped, and I was on one side of the road and he was on the other where the bus stopped, I had to wait till 4 vehicles passed before I could go across the road, and I just told him, come on, get my truck, we'll go. And we rode around that. That situation is solved. But that is not something I feel like. I certainly would not have wanted my grandchildren, my children, or your grandchildren or children to be put in that situation. It says in this code, hazardous zones. The part about the sexual offender, they were everywhere around there. Now, whenever you turn a child loose, and you know, when you turn a child loose, especially a younger child, they may draw it out in the road. I refer you back 25 years, Nashville. Tabitha Tudor was going to a bus stop. I don't recall how old she was.
12.
I guess she was maybe 12. She disappeared, and to this day, she has not been found. I feel like, and it's my own opinion, we are fortunate that no one has had that happen, as far as I know, in Lawrence County. I don't feel like we're bound by other districts as what they do. The state of Tennessee defined this as hazardous zones. They basically said, it's in your hands, you deal with it, correct?
Yes, that's correct. You have pretty broad discretion to do
And
whatever
I
you need to do.
am one, we may spend $135,000 for a school bus, but what price is it if a child gets run over, gets taken? If it requires us to go that extra mile, then I'm going to be for that going extra mile. I'd like to hear anything in regard to what you have feelings of, whether it be legal or personal, on this on this situation. Do you feel like if we decide to do that, and some other suggestions I have here, that would be good, would it not?
Well, yes, and the board, I mean, the law gives this board broad discretion to do what it thinks needs to be done with regard to the transportation of students. There are some very minimal requirements that if we have a transportation system, first of all, school transportation is not mandated in the law, and many people don't know that. You can do away with your transportation system. You can contract out your transportation system. You can contract for all your drivers. We have all three of those in those arrangements in Tennessee. We have, again, one system that I know of doesn't provide transportation. We have several systems that the Bradley County schools, Rutherford County schools, several school districts contract out all their bus service. Hamilton County, you remember that one from Ooltewah with a contract driver with the Durham company. So that we have that arrangement. That most of the school systems in Tennessee own their own buses and employ their own drivers. They own their own fleets and hire their own drivers. But the law gives this board broad discretion about what it does with regard to transportation service. So again, I know nobody wants to bring this down to dollars and cents, but it does come down to what you can provide a very nice, very convenient transportation service if you wish and you want to pay for it and you've got the personnel to run it, or you can provide the bare bones, as you say. The law sets a floor, it doesn't set a ceiling. But the thing you can't do is have a transportation system that violates the provisions of the law. If you say, well, we're not going to transport everybody within 1.5 miles of this stop, we're going to transport everybody within 2 miles of this stop. Well, I'd have to write you a nastygram and say you can't do that. You can't do that. You're going to have to, if you're going to have a transportation system, you're going to have to comport. You're going to have licensed drivers. I've been involved in a little friendly conversation with the Tennessee Highway Patrol lately about private school drivers. They hired our firm to talk to them. I said they got to have licenses. So if you decide you're not going to have a license to drive, then I'm going to write you a letter and say yes, you got to have a license to drive a bus. And you got to have a certain kind of a license, and that bus has to be inspected every year. So again, there are some very minimal requirements, but again, the law leaves it to you. If you say those children should not walk down that street, I want a bus to go down that street, and we've got a way to get that bus down there and back safely, then that's this board's decision. That's this board's decision. But once you put that in a policy, once you draw a route that goes that way, the law expects that you're going to run that bus down that road.
I've got two more questions. One may be simple, simple.
Let me stop you real quick. I'll get back to that. Does anybody have any questions so far, what we have discussed, before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
Who legally is responsible for anything that happens to a child in Lawrence County?
Well, I can't answer that question. It may be a parent, It may be the school system if the child is under the domain of the school system at an activity or participated in an activity that's governed by the school system. It could be somebody else entirely. I mean, a third party. We had several years ago, we had some children in Morgan County who were on a school bus that got hit by a dump truck because they had a legal stop, which was just over the crest of a hill. Dump truck topped the hill. That dump truck driver is responsible for that, and his company paid a lot of money for that accident. So it's it depends on which party is tagged with fault. I can't stand here and tell you that a school board will not be sued in those situations. I'd be crazy to do that. When those of you who've attended my sessions in the TSBA convention know that when somebody starts out a question, will I be sued? I interrupt them and I go, yes, you will be sued. So it's and after that we apportion liability based on the actions that happen. So is it possible you could be sued in every instance? Yes. Is it possible you're going to be found liable in every instance? The answer to that is no. Far from no. So it's again, is there a possibility of your liability? Yes, but in every instance, that's just not going to be the case.
I appreciate your patience with me. I have one more question. If a child is let off a school bus to walk to their residence, what would you suggest the length of the walk be? 1 mile? Half a mile? 3/10 of a mile? 2/10 of a mile? Or when they see the rooftop of their house? What is the answer to that one?
Well, it's whatever your driver and your transportation supervisor and your director of schools determines is a safe walk from the place where that bus is. If it's over a hill, or if it's on a crowded street, or if it's in a wooded area, if it's around one of these intersections that we talked about a while ago, we may want to move a bus stop. It's whatever and those cases are made on a situational basis. We move school bus stops every year based on situations. If there are frequent wrecks at a place, if it causes traffic congestion. I can't give you an answer to your question that just says I'm going to pick. But I think what you have to do is run that route. And I'll tell you right now, if you ever get on a bus as one of these bus drivers has invited you to do, it's a life-changing experience. Particularly if you get on there with it and it's full of students. I've done that. Both on a regular route transportation bus and on a special ed bus. And but you have to make those decisions yourself, but it's situational. It's not county. The difference on this road out here may be very different from a private road where we have to make a decision about whether we can even run the bus up that road or not. Is it safe to take our equipment up that road or not? Because, and I don't mind telling you, several years ago I was involved with the school system where we had to stop going up a private road because the driver and the transportation supervisor and an engineer whom we hired said, I wouldn't even take my car across the culvert that's out there. So we had a special ed student who had to come to the road. And because of the federal implications of that question, of not providing transportation door to door to a special education student, we made sure we had an expert witness up front. So it's situational. It's going to be situational. It's not going to be, this is good, this is a good distance for everybody, period. It's going to be situational.
Thank you for your answers, Mr. Crusoe. I'd like to reserve the right at the end of this discussion to make some motions, please.
I'll let you have that right. And I have one question, or getting back to Dr. Maybe's question. He had, I believe one of his questions was, are we reliable if a child happens to get hurt when we let them off the bus? Now, according to what you're saying, if it's in the policy that we provided and put in law that we have to abide by, and it wasn't followed, then we are responsible, correct?
Yes, there could be some, based on the Bowers case, there could be some liability that attaches to the board. But generally, when I talk to the Transportation Association and Pigeon Forge, and I've done that several times, And they ask me the very same types of questions. Once we fix those bus stops and we inform that route, the riders on that route where that bus stop is going to be, once that bus stops there and then pulls in the yard arm, if there is one, and pulls the beacon back in, the lights go off and the bus moves away, at that point, unless we know, have specific knowledge of a danger, at that point our liability ends. And the child is in the custody of their parents at that point. Now again, with the caveat that if that child gets off the bus, yard arm comes in, beacon comes in, lights go off, bus pulls away, and that child punches somebody, then the principal of that school still has the ability to discipline that child because that's an area that's controlled by the school. With that one caveat. Other than that, once that bus stops, the child exits the bus, and that is the bus stop, and they generally know when it's going to be there. Once that child exits the bus, then our liability stops there. And they would have to prove that we knew of a dangerous or defective condition that exists after we let the child off in order to attach the school system successfully to that lawsuit.
Thank you. John, go ahead.
Mr. Cagle, early on in your conversation or in your response, when Mr. Mabry asked you if a school bus was an extension of the school day, and your answer was yes, but it has its boundary. Can you elaborate on?
Yes, I was referring
what
just.
What is that boundary?
That boundary is when the child exits the bus. If the child cuts up the seats or gets in a fight or does some filming on a school bus, whatever they do, whatever mischief they get into, or whether they just sit there and ride, once that bus pulls away, then that's our boundary.
Okay.
That's our boundary.
Well, to expound on that, in that same conversation, you explained, or tried to explain, when Lawrence County School System takes responsibility of this child. And you know, that's when some of the questions back and forth, but if I recall, you stated when that child arrives at that bus stop, that is a sanctioned school stop. Mm-hmm. So in the morning time, we take responsibility of the child as soon as they arrive to the stop, but in the afternoon, we relinquish that responsibility as soon as the bus pulls away. That seems contradictory to me.
I understand that it does, but that's just the way it operates.
Really, that's the way, I mean,
Yes.
So if that kid arrives at the bus stop an hour before the bus is supposed to arrive, we have assumed responsibility for this kid.
No, that's a very different question. If we say that bus is going to be at that stop at 7:40 in the morning.
Yes, sir.
We assume that child arrives there somewhere within 10 minutes or so of that. There's a reasonable time. The bus, and we usually give a block of time, not a specific time that a bus will arrive because of traffic and other things that can happen. But the bus will be there between 7:40 and 7:50 in the morning. That's, and the child arrives there. That's generally when our responsibility begins. And again, that's mainly for discipline purposes.
Okay.
Mainly for discipline purposes. Unless we know. And folks, I'm going to stress this again, unless we know that a stop is in a dangerous place.
I've got another question that follows that.
And there's been a lot of litigation on that.
That very line. Is it Lawrence County School System Director Atkins and Bus Superintendent Josh, is it their responsibility to get on the Tennessee sex offender website and to check it and to check every route? Does that fall on Lawrence County School System?
It does not. Every sex offender that's the burden of the sex offender, is to know that information and know when children are present and to stay away. And that's, I get asked this question an awful lot of times about people who are on the registry, about coming to parent-teacher conferences and other things. It's not our duty to know that. It's their duty to tell us as a condition of release from jail, generally, that they're told they're on the registry, and if you go around the place where children are, then you're going to have to tell that. Case in point, although not a school case, I represent the church I attend in Nashville, First Baptist Church. We have offenders who stay down at the mission who come to our church. We have a policy with the mission. And then some of the folks down there, not everybody down there is an offender, clearly, But those who are know that when they come to our church, there's a security checkpoint. They're assigned a shadow. We don't walk them around and lead them around, but they're assigned a shadow. We take them in to have a seat with them. We allow them to worship. We leave with them and make sure that they leave the property. But they have to tell us. It's not our responsibility to know, but once we do know it, it's our responsibility to act.
So, along that same line of questioning, if one of our bus drivers testified that we pull in all over this county, but especially here in the city of Lawrenceburg, they're dropping off at apartment complexes, some right down the road here.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt, there is probably a sex offender living in some of these apartment complexes. Is Lawrence County School System liable for our bus driver making that stop? And she can't keep eyes on these kids as they're going. So something to Mr. Mabry's point, if this child with Tabitha tutors that he brought up, if this child becomes abducted, is that Lawrence County School System's fault?
Generally not. And your situation with apartment complexes is not different from many places in the state. I mean, many, many places in the state. There's usually one or two drop-off places for the apartment complex, and they leave. We have communities, there's one with which I'm familiar in Franklin particularly, where they have one drop-off for an entire community, because the entire community is less than a mile and a half from the bus stop. So the kids that live in there, the children live in there, go stopped off at one place. Once that stop is made and the children exit the bus, generally you're not responsible for that. Now they would have to jump through a lot of hoops to know, A, that you knew that there was a sex offender living there, B, that you knew that this person was out lurking around when the children were let off the bus, in violation of their probation. So it's what you actually know at the time that will tag you with some liability, but generally not. That liability will not attach to you.
Thank you.
Are there any further
Mr.
questions?
Caruso, I've got a follow-up in regard to what you said. I don't mean this to be a smart question, but we have to rely on the honesty of a sex offender to report their location to Mr. Atkins, to transportation supervisor, or to the bus driver. Is that what I understood? That we have to rely on their honesty to do that?
Yes. Because to be dishonest about it means they go back to jail.
Yeah, but we've got to rely on their honesty.
Yes, they have an affirmative duty under the law to report. I mean, how else are you going to know that? With due respect, who here on staff is in charge of surveying the community and figuring out where the sex offenders live?
It's online. I'm not a technology person, but I can go to Tennessee sex offender TBI and did on the 3 occasions that I know about of children being let off. And it tells you what road they live on, what their address is.
That's
if
true.
I can do it, certainly the school can do it.
Okay, that's true.
Central office.
Follow me through this example. I don't mean, Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to be argumentative here, but follow me through this example. You let the child off, you change your route. You let the child off at a different place. The child now walks 1/10 of a mile on a different route home. The sex offender has, and you've done what you're supposed to do. You've checked on him. You know where he or she lives. You know that they're basically their hours of operation. You change your route, you let the child off of the bus, and they walk from the bus pulls off, and they walk from the bus to the front door, and they're accosted at the front door. Are you liable for that?
You want to answer?
Yeah.
At that point in time, I would think when they enter their yard or their driveway, then the parent takes charge, just like we take charge whenever they get on that bus.
Well, again, you're free. I'm not going to argue with you about that.
I mean, I'm not trying to be argumentative.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm
my
not gonna,
sole purpose
Yeah.
is the safety of the children in this
Sure.
county. And I want to dot every I and cross every T and do everything that these 9 elected people can do to keep those children safe.
I think the goal of everybody sitting in this room is to make sure children are safe. Everybody. I've never advocated for an unsafe condition for a child in my life. But what I do say is the people of, when you come up with a policy like that, you got to make sure, A, it's functional. Can you operate that policy once you produce it, that we're going to let every child out in their front yard? Do you have the equipment and the manpower to do that? And if you don't, then you're going to have to make some decisions, and that's when the compromises begin. I have nothing against the policy for which you advocate, nothing at all. My job is just to say, once you put that into policy, once you put that into practice, you got to keep it up. You got to keep it up.
Corey has a question.
I don't know that I necessarily got a question, maybe I do, but something I haven't heard the whole time we've been talking about this is the parent responsibility. Not one time have I heard a parent responsibility. I don't think it's the school system's responsibility to hunt every sex offender. If I have a child that's going to get on a bus, I'm going to look and see if there's a sex offender around me. So I think what we're some of the things that we're doing, I think that we're really trying to overcompensate for the fact that some of the responsibility that we need to be putting on parents, we're trying to take care of. So I guess maybe there is a question out of that. If Mr. Rogers draws the bus routes, Mr. Atkins agrees to everything, some kids have some walking to do, some kids whatnot, why are we not having discussions more with parents to say, all right, here's the reasons why, this is the way it is. What is the parent responsibility? If we can't get down this road, it falls back on a parent to get them to that spot, or when they get there in the afternoons, to get them back home, where it's not all falling back on the school system. I mean, again, we've been here for an hour, and not one time I haven't heard anybody say, where's the parents at in all this? I mean, in my opinion, it's got to fall back more so on the parents than it does us. Again, we need to do all that we can to get kids home safely and take care of bus drivers and all that. But we're leaving parents out and their responsibility of all this. The last thing I want to say, and I want to address the bus drivers that came up earlier and said something. We, as a board, realize there needs to be more bus drivers. So I don't think y'all meant it this way, but when y'all are talking about it, we're not keeping from more bus drivers being hired. So just to kind of stand up for everybody, and I didn't take offense of it, but hey, we're an advocate of more bus drivers being hired. The thing about it is, the 9 of us don't hire them. So we're all for having more bus drivers, having more subs, make it easier. Listen, I was going to ask Josh if he still has to drive. I think a year or so, or 2 years ago, we made a comment, you should never have to drive a bus. And you shouldn't have to drive a bus. But at the end of the day, I think we've got to make sure that parents do their part of the responsibility of kids getting on a bus, off a bus, and being safe.
Ms. Brenda?
First and foremost, none of us are trash bus drivers. I myself drove a bus. My father was the bus driver. We know what you go through. I would encourage you, I read through all the answers that you gave. 98% of them was discipline. What you need to do is come to the board and present the board with what you need to help you with discipline. We can't help you if you don't come ask us. The main purpose of this meeting was children walking without nobody. My neighbor had a little 5-year-old grandson. About a month ago, when all this started, that child was playing in the yard. He went out in the cornfield. He was lost. The whole neighborhood was hunting him. What would keep one of these kids that happening to them? If they're let walk 3/4 of a mile, if a dog comes out of somebody's yard, a rabbit, fox, we live out in the country. This county is rural. I understand that you can't get around in the city a lot of times. The road we were talking about had been driven. My husband's electrical inspector. We inspected every house out there. And that bus has been running that route ever since. And then all of a sudden, these kids are not going to be picked up. Are we willing to take a chance on a child walking that far? We're rural, get lost out in the fields. I know parents have responsibilities, but parents also have to work for a living. And the school, we all know the school tries to do, and the bus drivers, they try to do their best. And like I said, we're not trashing you. We're just trying to get to a solution that we put these kids off where they're safe.
Before I take one more question and ask from the audience, does the board have anything else? Go ahead, ma'am, you got 2 minutes.
In regard to what Ms. Jacobs said, if you let a 5-year-old off, where is the parent? I mean, we're putting a lot of kids in danger by sitting in the road for 20 minutes and nobody's anywhere around.
Right.
Somebody, parents have got to be responsible. I mean, at this point, they would really like for us to get them out of bed and feed them breakfast before they get on the bus.
I
There's got to be
agree.
a limit.
I agree with you there, but also a 5-year-old walking 3/10 of a mile is not the solution. We got to find a different
The parents should be there
solution.
to pick them up and put them in the car or walk with them.
Well, are we gonna leave them if they don't?
Constantly missed the bus when he was in kindergarten, and he lived 1.5 miles from school. And do you know what his daddy did? He walked with him to school, and buddy, that kid didn't miss the bus no more.
Well, that, you know, that is a suggestion,
Parents have
but
got to
you
get on
have
board.
to enforce it. How do you enforce it? If you can give us some ideas on how to enforce it, we'll be glad to take
I
them.
mean, in regards to that road, I'm just telling you, there are a lot of roads that are going to want bus service if you continue to go down that private road.
Thank you. Sir, you had one more comment?
Mr. Mabry's question about a long driveway or anything, you know. Concentrate, for a bus driver, we concentrate on one kid or 2 kids or 2 kids getting to their home. Me as a bus driver, I may have 50 kids behind me that I'm responsible for. If I go up that road, is it gonna be a good turnaround? Is it gonna be a deep ditch? So I got liability issues on that too. It ain't just a one, I got 50, maybe kids behind me that I'm responsible for. So I think the bus drivers sort of, they use a good judgment about it, like I said, but the parents, you know. I mean, comment parents all the time low, you know, it seems like it is to me. Because they don't take no responsibility, and you got, they one bus and call a parent, then you got 2 problems, kid and a parent.
One more, and we'll go on.
I'm just gonna say this.
Sure.
I think it's a policy that we have to have a parent, stay a parent, to let them off at pre-K. If it's a kindergarten kid, we can let them off and let them go. There's no policy. I will not do that. I make a parent be there, or I take them back to school.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
We appreciate you.
Go ahead, John, and then I'll have the floor back to Dr. Mabry for the last comments. Go ahead, John.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a few more things I'd like to say. Again, I appreciate the school bus drivers and their presence. I'd like to start by directing our attention to the survey that they sent, and Ms. Brenda spoke to this as well. But 22 out of 44 statements from the school bus drivers to the #1 question, their biggest challenge in facing the role as a driver, 22 out of 44 responses had to do with behavior and or discipline. I would like this board, when we talk about a bus driver shortage, in my mind, I rode a bus as a child. Bozo Shelton was my bus driver. I was scared to death of him. We didn't say a word. But I would like to see us, and I think it would help with recruitment of drivers, if we could put in another adult on this bus. whether it's a teacher, a volunteer, or whatever be the case, another paid bus driver, however we want to work that, Mr. Atkins, however we can come up with that in the school system, if these bus drivers had an aide to where Mr. Gillum can worry about driving and whoever else is on his bus can worry about students. That's what I would like to see us get to. Now, to Mr. Rochelle's statement to you, this board has always, this whole board has always been in support of that. And so has Mr. Atkins and so has Mr. Rogers. We're trying to hire, we're recruiting, we've got signs and advertisements. We've been talking about this. I've been on this board for 6 years now. This has been a topic every year. We are limited. There is a ceiling on what we can pay. We've got a budget that we've got to go by. We try and we want to pay you as much as we possibly can. We want to pay subs, we want to pay everybody as much as we can. But I would like to see us dip into our pockets and try to help, because I think maybe if we had an assistant, then some of these 22 comments about behavior could go away. So I'm going to stop on that one. After poring over all of these policies over the past several weeks, I've had multiple conversations with Mr. Atkins and other community members about different things, but I too tend to lean on what Mr. Rochelle brought to the attention. Parents need to step up and be parents. We can't do Uber service door to door. I, for one, see nothing wrong with the policies and the procedures that we have in place other than the clerical issues that I brought up to Mr. Atkins, and I'm in support of where we are and how we're doing.
Mr. Mabry, you have the floor for the last portion.
I originally had 4 proposals. I've added 5. It just coincidentally reflects, the 5th one reflects what what John had just talked about.
Before you move on, is it my understanding that if you have a motion and a second, we can vote on it tonight? Is that correct?
Yes, it's a special
I'm asking.
session. It's not a work session, it's a special session.
It's a special session, and that's what I told Dr. Mabry. Bring them up, we'll have a motion, a second, and we'll vote, and if they pass, they go into policy. Go ahead.
Mr. Crusoe, I would ask that each one of these be voted on separately.
Yes, exactly. I
Okay,
agree.
thank you.
I agree.
The first one, transportation supervisor does not drive, the transportation supervisor will not drive a substitute bus route. And my thinking on that is, if he or she, whoever the person is, was driving a bus route in Iron City and there was a wreck in Summertown, they need to be available to go to that route. Go to that accident, emergency. Mr. Atkins goes to schools unannounced, which is a good thing. He sees what's going on without having the principal walk with him. In this case, if the supervisor of transportation was free to do his job, he can randomly select bus routes and ride to see if there is a problem on that route with behavior. So I move that the transportation supervisor no longer drive substitute bus routes.
Jessica, could you read the motion, please?
I got a question about that.
Let her read the motion first.
The motion is the transportation supervisor will not drive a substitute bus route.
Do we have a motion?
A motion, do you have a second?
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Go ahead with your question.
What if there's nobody else to run that route?
You asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
We have
because
tier 2 bus
he's
drivers.
responsible for that position, and if nobody else can run that route, and he has to run that route, and we don't have anybody doing the second tier stuff to do it, he only does it when he has to. What are we doing in that situation?
As was mentioned in the last 3 directors, the question has been asked, do you need more money, more pay for bus drivers? No reaction. We have tier 2 bus drivers in this county. that are paid additional funds to run the second route. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, are they fully utilized? I don't know. But I do know if there's an accident in the county, the transportation supervisor should be there. Maybe even the director should be there.
I got a question. Josh, is this feasible? You're here, stand up, please. Honest opinion, please.
So, honest opinion, I want to do what is best for the students. And if I drive a bus, that means 50 kids are going to get to school on time. And if I don't drive a bus, that means they're going to get to school after 8:30. So, I agree. And nobody doesn't want to drive a bus more than I don't want to drive a bus, okay? I don't. Not every day. But I think it's good for, if I'm going to supervise these folks, I need to know what they go through on a day-to-day basis. If you say I don't need to drive a bus for that, that's fine with me. But just know that there's a group of kids, because even though yes, we have tier 2 drivers, we have 6 of those. And yes, they are utilized pretty much almost every day, at least one to 3 of them every day. Now, are there some days that they don't drive? Yes, there are. But very seldom are my tier 2 drivers not driving in some form or fashion. And then on top of that, we have non-tier 2 drivers that are driving as well, because we may have more than 6 people out in a day. And that's with me driving. And right now, we are 2 drivers completely short, okay? The one that I'm running and the one that Mr. Mabry is driving. Mr. Ricky Mabry is driving. Okay? That one is probably going to be filled this week, okay? After fall break, okay, we already know of 2 drivers that are retiring, or one is retiring and one is resigning. So we're going to be short 3 drivers after fall break that we know right now. And that's if I don't drive. So, you know, if that's the board's decision, by all means, yes, I will not drive. But just know that there's a group of kids that's not going to get to school on time.
I got one more question for you. If we put this into motion and it passes, how long will you need? Well, if we give you a time, how long will you need to have this motion in process? So if we pass this tonight, tomorrow you don't drive. If we put an amendment on it for 30 days, would that fix it? Or regardless, 30 days or tomorrow, it doesn't matter.
I've already, you know, we've got a driver that's, having surgery Thursday. I've already made plans. I would at least like to be able to drive to a fall break anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, fall break.
Okay. Go ahead. You got to put hand up.
In the situation that he said, you're driving a bus, we have an accident on the other end of the county. You're on a bus. Are you handling that situation on that bus, or is Mr. Adkins handling it? How are we handling that situation?
So
that way it's okay with the board how we're handling it.
So in that situation, my shop foreman, Mr. Hauser, he goes immediately, he is dispatched immediately to that bus. My drivers know, my office staff, they contact Mr. Adkins, Mr. Tucker, and then decisions are made based upon when he gets there and when the highway patrol gets there. My driver knows my drivers, they know what to do as far as, checking for injuries, doing those things, calling 911, all of those things are in place. We have a process for that. We have a plan for that.
I had a hand up. Was it you, Jerry? Go ahead.
I just have a question for Mr. Rogers. If you continue to drive a bus when needed, which appears to be often, and there is an accident like Mr. Mabry is referring to, do you have an assistant, and it may be that it's Mr. Hauser, someone else that goes to that? In fact, I think that's probably what you were just referring to.
Yes, Mr. Tim goes.
He goes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Any other questions? Please call roll.
I do have one thing.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Court.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Court.
I was just gonna ask Mr. Atkins what his opinion of it was.
As far as Mr. Rogers driving?
Having to, let me rephrase that. Assuming nobody wants him driving every day, what is your opinion that if he's got to get in a bus once every 2 weeks because a certain situation, what's your opinion of that?
Yeah, I think I think the situation that we find ourselves in, and Mr. Rogers willing to drive to get kids to school on time, keeps us from having issues with teachers and students and disrupting the academic day, coming in at 8:30, then getting breakfast, getting in class at 9 o'clock. He's doing us a service getting our kids to school. He's doing us a service in the afternoon getting them home. Our principals are having to stay around now to help monitor kids, and we pay folks to monitor kids. I think if you take him out of the mix, it's going to put an additional stress on the system. Ideally, we don't want him driving. We want him popping on a bus. We want him following a bus. We want him to make sure the bus driver is doing all the things that he's trained to do, and Josh is checking up on him. That would be ideal, but we need more drivers to make that happen. So I would say I would prefer Josh not to drive, but we need to have a surplus of drivers so we can get kids to school on time and back home on time.
Go ahead, John, last question.
Mr. Crusoe, can I ask Ms. Jessica, can you restate the motion?
Sure. The motion is for the transportation supervisor will not drive a substitute bus ride.
So, by the reading of what I just heard and understand that to mean, this vote is going to forbid from henceforward, if it passes, that position from ever driving a bus, regardless. That is what that motion states. Is that my understanding? Mr. Cagle, is that what that motion just stated? Yes. Thank you. No
Please
more
call
questions
roll.
from me, Mr. Crusoe.
Oh, I had one. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just one comment. It seems to me like we're asking somebody to do something here and not offering any kind of solution to the situation. I mean, I don't know what that solution should be, but I don't see how we can say you can't do one thing without offering some kind of a plan to alleviate that problem.
Brenda?
Just one question for Mr. Rogers. If, with you driving the bus, do you not still have situations that bus such and such and such and such will not run today? You can't do that, all of it by yourself, right?
No, we still have second routes even though I'm driving, yes.
So in other words, if we take you off, that won't make the situation that much worse.
Well,
It'll just
oh,
give
yeah.
you the opportunity to do
It'll-
your job.
Well,
That would be one
Or
route.
it'll be one route, yeah, it would be one route that we would have to run another second.
That
route
wouldn't,
for.
it wouldn't take away the problem you drive.
No.
One more question. Go ahead.
And tier 2 puts the kids there an hour later,
It
30
it
minutes to an hour later.
It varies on where the routes are, but like some of your town routes here in Lawrenceburg area, it may be, they could get there by 8. In the rural areas, like Crockett, you're looking at, by the time they go out Crockett and drop off at Crockett, then drop off at Kaufman, then go and drop off at Lawrence County High School, you're looking at 8:30, 8:45 a lot of times. Same way at Summertown, maybe a little bit quicker in Summertown, maybe 8:15, Trish, if you want to answer that. 8:15 to 8:30. It really depends on where the routes are.
Please call roll.
Caruso,
No.
Daniel,
No.
Dryden,
No.
Hartsfield,
No.
Jacobs,
Yes.
Mabry, Nodder,
No.
Rochelle,
No.
Weathers,
No.
2 yes, 7 no.
Motion fails. Any other one? Dr. Mabry, you still have the floor.
Yes. I move that Mr. Atkins should have final decision in stopping bus service on any route in Lawrence County.
Would you please read the motion, Jessica?
Mr. Atkins should have final decision, and can you repeat that?
Stopping bus service on any road in Lawrence County.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second. Are there any questions?
Right here.
Go ahead.
I'm
Who
kind
was
of
it?
lost here. I thought he did that now. I mean, I may be totally wrong with the final decision. Is that not?
In the policy.
So currently, the bus drivers will make a recommendation to Mr. Rogers. Hey, this road or this bridge or whatever it is poses a risk in their assessment. They pass that on to Mr. Rogers. He goes out and checks the road, and he may override them, or he may tell them, well, you can go down and turn and come this way. He gives a solution. If he finds that that is a dangerous situation, then he will halt that. Same way as drivers will halt a route the morning after a storm. If they can't cross, they still have that, but I think what Dr. Mabry is suggesting is before we would discontinue service, and Dr. Mabry, if I'm wrong, you correct me, that Mr. Rogers and I would go and inspect the road and say, okay, together, I support his decision or I override his decision. I think that's where we're going with that.
Is that not in our policy?
I'm only brought in on an appeal to it. It's Mr. Rogers and the bus drivers right now who make that call, and the final decision is made by Mr. Rogers. He would say to someone, you need to fix this area, or we can't cross this bridge anymore, for whatever reasons. And he could give you a number of examples. He and I and Mr. Hauser did travel a road about a bus turnaround, and that was very productive. We all sat there and said, where's the safest place? Not the easiest, but the safest place to turn this bus around with these kids on it. And we've started doing that already. But I don't make the final decision right now. Mr. Rogers does. He knows the buses. He knows the issues. I wouldn't want us to not, something well-intended, not give the bus drivers still the opportunity to make those decisions after storms, difficult situations. They're transporting, as the gentleman said, 50 kids. He needs to make that decision, spot at that moment in time, not have to worry about us overriding him. He knows what's best for those kids on that bus.
Clark, did you have something? Mr. Mabry?
I'm ready to vote.
John?
From what I understand, that motion to read, it needs to be changed to a discontinuation, because the way it's reading right now, it's going to eliminate these bus drivers from making the decision that the road is too slick or the creek is too high. I'm not going to drive down that road.
Mr. Crusoe.
You make an amendment to that?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Mr. Crusoe, it does not say that.
Read the motion again, please.
The motion is for Mr. Atkins should have the final decision in stopping bus service on any road in Lawrence County.
Mr. Crusoe.
Go ahead, Mabry.
Bus drivers inform the transportation supervisor. The transportation supervisor should involve Mr. Atkins before it is discontinued.
Can I put some parentheses for
Wait,
how long?
just a minute. That has not been done currently on every case. I'll say it like that. Has it, Mr. Atkins?
I'm just, can you?
Wait just a minute, let me finish this. Has it, Mr. Atkins?
Has.
Have you been informed on every instance where bus service has been stopped on a road in Lawrence County?
I only know of one that has come up this year, but I haven't been told that. Mr. Rogers, by policy, has made those decisions, but I haven't been advised of that.
Okay, thank you.
My question is how long, give me the time frame of discontinued. That's what I want to know.
Of what?
A discontinued. It says in the motion, it all falls back to Mr. Atkins on a bus route that's discontinued. You mean permanently? You mean due to weather?
The
You
motion
mean
doesn't say
to?
discontinued.
On the instance that Mr. Atkins is referring to, on which, as I understood it, he was unaware of. He went and visited the road. He actually counted the potholes. And then when the road was brought up to where a bus was felt like, and I'm assuming by a bus driver and transportation and Mr. Atkins, it was restarted. The goal would be for anybody to to have the route restored as soon as possible. And I would think, as director of schools, as his job is to oversee the entire school system, which it is a terribly big job, that he should have final say in discontinuing a bus route, or postponing, or whatever word you want to use, until the problem is solved.
One last question, anybody?
Good. Mr. Crusoe?
Go ahead.
So if a bus driver is going down the road and he's turning off of a paved road onto a dirt road that could be icy, and he stops and says, no, I'm not going down that road, then he's got to call Mr. Rogers, and then Mr. Rogers has got to call the director of schools, and they have to get together and decide whether that bus is going.
Not currently.
That's not discontinuing, that's just unsafe that one day.
Okay, so when we can, this motion, read that again. The motion is to
That's what
discontinue.
that motion is saying. Mr. Mayor, that's not what that motion is saying.
I'm gonna, I don't want to jump in the middle of this, but what the maker of the motion, what do you intend by the motion? Do you mean it to
If
be
it
a
is an
daily?
icy road, the bus driver is in charge of knowing whether they can go
Okay.
down the road, to start with. This is a thought-out process. The roads that have been discontinued, Mr. Atkins looked at them and made the determination as to whether or not they were safe. One of them was a private road, one of them involved cul-de-sacs, and the other one didn't involve anything. I mean, it was just there that these children were let off and walked down this 2-lane highway.
I think.
I called him on 2 of the instances myself, and he was made aware of it. Now, that's not, I don't know, I'm not a legal mind, but Mr. Atkins is in charge. He should have had the right to know of this before it was discontinued or changed.
Yeah, I'm going to yield to the will of the board on this, but it seems what the speaker is saying, Dr. Mabry is saying, is that if this route is discontinued permanently on anything close to a permanent basis, then the director of schools will have the authority, will be the final authority on that. If it's a temporary shutdown, if it's a temporary delay because of weather conditions or high water or whatever, then that's going to be made probably by the transportation director and the bus driver. But if it's a permanent shutdown, what I hear Mr. Mabry say, if we're going to permanently stop that route, then that decision will be made by the director of schools. And to that, I want to add, to the exclusion of this board, there would be no appeal to the board on that issue. And that's in keeping with Tennessee law, because the director of schools is charged under 49-301, with the day-to-day operation of the school system.
There would be no appeal to the board from the community or anybody?
That's correct. If you make this motion.
Mr. Atkins makes the rule to discontinue that service down that road, then that is law, and you can't even come to the board.
That's your policy. That would be your policy. We're not amending the law, we're amending policy.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
That's the.
Yes. Now, if this board wishes to hear somebody suspend its policy and take an action, that's what would be required. But the intent of this motion, as I read it, just trying to play parliamentarian here, the intent of this motion, as I read it, is if the decision is made to permanently discontinue a route, then that decision would rest with the office of the director of school.
I have a question, Kevin. And in the same instance we're talking about, the road that was discontinued, Mr. Atkins went down it, he looked at it, he told them what they had to do. They did it, he opened it back up.
Yes.
That was his decision. He made the final decision. I think that's what Ricky's referring to. He needs to have the final say whether you go or whether you don't. And whenever he decided it was safe, then the bus went back.
That decision is made by superintendents literally every week of the year in Tennessee.
Mr. Atkins, did that same process that Ms. Brenda just explained, that when you was made aware of it and you went and you visited this road and you told the community of that road, the houses of that road, what needed to be done. Mr. Rogers, had you not already did that very thing before Mr. Atkins came?
I had told them that, the road needed to be fixed before we sent the bus back down there.
Thank you.
Please call roll.
Person.
There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, Mr. Atkins, you hired the transportation supervisor, correct?
Yes, sir.
You hired him with these responsibilities, correct?
Yes, sir.
So you trust him with making that decision and allowing him to make that decision, and then it gets appealed back to you, which gives you the final decision on it in the appeals, right?
Correct.
So if we leave it the way it is, we're trusting him to do his job, and then we're trusting you to be over him still to make the decision in the appeal. But we don't change it to where we micromanage and make you have to do part of his job, correct?
Correct.
Because you're, okay.
Yeah, I think if it goes bus driver, transportation director, and then we go out and say, okay, here's what the bus driver is saying is an issue. Is that an issue, Mr. Rogers? Yes, it's an issue. The swing of the bus or what have you, the condition of the road, what have you. If we both sit there and look at that and I feel like, okay, that's correct, then I would say that. If I felt like, Mr. Rogers, you need to find another way. There's 3 roads out here. Can you find another road to get down here? He and I would do that.
Right.
But at the end of it, we're not going to run the bus down the road, what Dr. Mabry's suggesting, that it comes to me to say, yes, we will, or no, we won't. We won't stop until that decision is made by me. And if I'm wrong, Dr. Mabry, you correct me.
Well, as if that already happened.
Yeah, Mr. Rogers and I have talked about several issues and corrected them right away. I mean, where there's been a question of transportation, turnaround. We had one today that there was not a turnaround available, and I told him follow board policy. If you cannot successfully turn that bus around safely, don't go down that road. Because we do have students on that bus that we are responsible for, and we have to make sure that bus can safely turn around, and the driver can maneuver that bus. I mean, there's several interests there. The driver and the students, we want to make sure that we can turn that bus around. He and I talk as often as we have to about these things.
Motion is on the floor in a second. Please call roll.
Weathers,
So if I say no, I'm keeping it exactly the way it is.
Correct.
I say no.
Rochelle,
Nope.
Nidert,
No.
Mabry,
Aye.
Jacobs,
Aye.
Hartsfield,
No.
Dryden,
Yes.
Daniel,
No.
Caruso,
Keep as is, no.
3 yes, 6 no.
Motion fails. Dr. Mabry, you still have the floor.
I move that if a bus driver suspects a child's parents are not home, the driver will contact the bus garage, and they will contact the school about the child, and the bus will be brought back, or the child will be brought back to the school. The principal and director will determine what age or grade level applies.
Please read the motion.
I'm gonna let him reread that. I think he has that written down.
I
I may request a copy.
Mr. Caruso.
I understand.
Mr. Caruso, if a bus driver suspects a child's parents are not home, the driver will contact the bus garage will contact the principal, and the child will be returned to the school. The principal and the director will determine what age or grade level applies.
Motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor and a second. I would like to make a comment before I have any questions. We do that already, correct? Yes. Mr. Atkins, we do that already.
I'll let Mr. Rogers,
Mr. Rogers, we do that already.
Yes, sir, we do.
It's not in policy.
Is it in policy? If it's not in policy, we'll keep it as is. Is it in policy? Is one thing we do it, and another thing it's got to be in policy.
is it
Did
more of a
anybody
procedure?
answer? Is it procedure?
Procedure or practice by the bus drivers in the bus garage, is that? Is that correct, Mr. Rogers?
The only ones that we have to see an adult is pre-K, but they can also have an older sibling if we have a written note from the parent. Now, if you listen to the radio, it happens every single day. Most of the time, it's third grade and below, but if there is something not right about the stop, my guys always radio in, we call, find out, make sure somebody's home, or we take them back to the school if nobody's home. Because it happens just about every single day.
Thank you. Is there any questions, comments? I'm going to leave the motion and a second on the floor. Again, are there any questions or questions?
This is already in
Practice.
in procedure.
It's already in practice.
Procedure. As I understand it, it's in procedure, but it's not in policy. As I'm understanding that correct. Jessica, do you know? Mr. Atkins?
I don't think it's anything that we've submitted to
Okay.
you folks on the transportation, but the practice and procedures, there's things that probably are not in policy that they're doing to ensure safety. Is that,
Is
Ms.
that
Rogers?
stuff documented anywhere? Just like we had talked earlier today about some different things, Mr. Atkins, are things documented? Do you have, for new bus drivers, says, here's our procedures?
I have a procedure manual, but I do not think that practice is actually documented in that. It can be added in there really quick with that, but it's not.
Well, that's what the motion is for tonight. Go ahead, Jerry.
As I understand what's been said here, this is actually common sense practice and procedure, and has been for years. When I was principal, it was just a common sense practice.
Very good.
But it needs to be in policy, so I will be voting yes on this motion.
If it goes into policy, according to Mr. Cagle, it puts us liable, correct? I mean, not to say that we don't care the most about safety, but the way we're doing it, we're already taking care of it. If we put it into policy, then it goes back, it goes into the liability side of it, correct?
Yeah, you're gonna be liable for that child.
They're going to
be on the bus.
Go ahead.
Again, the only question that I have that is not solved by either putting in policy or practice is, again, parental responsibility, because now we're saying that child may indeed be on a bus longer than 90 minutes. Because we've now had to go the entire route and take the child back to school. So that's, that's not going to get you dinged really big as long as the child arrives safely. So I have no problem.
John?
What does this policy do? I grew up with parents who worked. I was a latchkey kid. What does this policy do to parents who have a third grader and a fourth grader or whatever that are dropped off at their door, but these child have been trained and taught, they go straight to the door, unlock the door, get themselves inside. We've got I'm just saying, if we put in the policy that we cannot drop a kid off unless we see a parent, then that is going to be policy.
But I also have the same comment on regards of yours. If we're doing this, if we're practicing this, if years on down the line, if you're already doing it, it's not going to make any difference if you put it in policy. You're still doing it, correct? I mean, except for the fact that we may be liable if it's in policy and we don't. But we're doing it already, so it's not going to make a difference, except for being liable. Go ahead, Brenda.
I think the key words there are at what age. I think that right now it is in policy, isn't it, Mr. Atkins? Pre-K, kindergarten.
I think it's just pre-K, state law.
Pre-K. I think there's your, and I think what Mr.
Is that in the motion? I don't need that.
Well, it says at the administration or at Michael
Okay.
Atkins' discretion.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? Go ahead.
Now, just to clarify, now this vote is to put this into policy,
Correct.
or,
We'll leave it the way it is.
but that's what we're voting.
Which is what Josh and the bus drivers do on a daily
And
practice.
Josh just said that that's what they do, but it's not in the procedure manual.
procedure, but not
And he
policy.
said it could very easily be added to the procedure manual. Seems to me like that's what we need to do.
But does policy not protect him since he's doing it anyway? He has the approval of the school board to do it?
I think by what Mr. Cagle said, he doesn't need the protection, because at that
Does he?
point, we've got the kid home, we've got the kid home safely. They
But if he
dropped off
takes
in
it
their yard,
back,
or
whose responsibility is it on him?
if a bus driver takes the kid
Bus
back,
driver.
he's still extending his school day. And it is the responsibility of the bus
But this
driver.
protects him.
Mr. Cagle, you look like you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
I don't know. If you have a procedure manual and you have a policy manual, speaking as a person who tries cases for a living, both of those are going to come into evidence. We're going to look at both your policy and procedure manual, and if it's not in either one of them, we're going to say, what is your practice in a deposition? What is your practice? What do you do? What is the standard procedure if the bus driver senses that something's wrong and the child's not let off the bus? What have you been told to do, if anything? All of that's going to come out. It's you can overprescribe in policy, from which you arguably have no wiggle room, and you certainly don't have any wiggle room in the law. You can overprescribe in policy, but you all heard me say this before at Summer Law Institute, having a good policy doesn't relieve you of the obligation to think. You still have to put that in practice somehow. This may be very well it may be very well fitted for a practice manual or an exhibit to a policy that says how we're going to operate if we don't, rather than putting it in policy so that everybody's compelled to fall into line without any discretion whatsoever. Practice manuals give you some discretion.
And I'll have Josh for the last. Go ahead.
So if it's put in policy, that's your decision. But I think that if it's put in policy, there needs to be some type of penalty to the parents that are constantly not being there to accept their children, because we're getting them from A to B, and from B to C is really where their responsibility comes in, me as a parent as well. So if we have to consistently have and most of the time, it's the same child or set of families that are not there, and we're having to go back to school. There needs to be something, if it's put in policy, to say, if you continuously are not there to accept your children, then there needs to be, a penalty for that. Whether it be not being able to ride the bus for a certain amount of time or whatever. But I think that if, policy is policy, and we're going to follow policy, but there needs to be something, a parent penalty there if it's continuous.
There's a law that states parents need to send their kids to school. We can't enforce that. Why do we sit here and think that we can enforce them to be at home when they're dropping their kids off?
Mr. Mabry, could you read that one more time? Or Jessica, one of you, it doesn't matter.
I'll read it this
Go
time.
ahead.
That way we'll verify that I have it down correct. The motion is, if a bus driver suspects parents are not home, the driver will contact the bus garage, call the school, and return the child to school. The principal and director of schools will determine what age or grade level applies.
And we do have a second. Jerry, I'll give you the last. Did you have something?
Well, I was just going, excuse me, I was going to make a comment. I heard one of the bus drivers, I think, mention DHS. And Josh, if you have the same parents doing this often, then I think that would be something that maybe should be seriously considered. I know we did. I can recall doing it a few times over the years.
I also,
Go ahead.
I also think that is asking a whole lot of the bus driver when they've got 30 kids behind them. They're focusing on the safety of the actual bus stop. So when you say if a driver suspects, I mean, what are we talking about there? Is it if no cars are in the driveway, even though, because I know on the route that I'm driving right now, For the stops, I can't see the house. I can just see where we drop the kids off at the end of the driveway. So I don't, what does that actually look like? And I think my drivers are agreeing with me back there. What does it look like? What does it mean to suspect that something is not right? Because a lot of times, we don't see the house. We don't see if there's a car in the driveway. I think that's asking a whole lot of these drivers when they're focusing on, you know, the oncoming traffic and, you know, the kids behind them. In my opinion, that's asking a lot.
Please call roll.
Caruso,
Yes.
Daniel,
No.
Dryden,
Yes.
Hartsfield,
No.
Jacobs,
Yes.
Mabry,
Aye.
Snyder,
No.
Rochelle,
No.
Weathers,
No.
4 yes, 5 no.
Motion carries.
Motion failed.
Motion failed.
I'm sorry, motion fails. My bad. Mr. Mabry, you still have the floor.
Yes, sir, thank you. All children riding school buses in Lawrence County will be picked up and returned to their driveways unless disciplinary action is enforced.
Read that one more time. I think we
Yes,
had
sir.
some.
All
sidebars
children
going on.
riding school buses in Lawrence County will be picked up and returned to their driveways unless disciplinary action is enforced. Is enforced.
We have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion in a second. Are there any questions? Comments?
I don't understand the motion at all.
Please
They're
clarify.
gonna be picked up and
When
brought
a
back to their
child
driveway.
gets on a
and-
school bus, it is at their driveway.
Okay,
When a child is dropped off the school bus, it is at their driveway.
now tell the last part. Disciplinary actions
Unless
enforced.
disciplinary action is
Acted
enforced.
on the bus and
Students are
driver.
kicked off the bus for various reasons.
Okay, all right.
If it is a discipline problem, that is not included in this.
Go ahead.
Are we discussing?
Yes.
What about the apartment complexes where your school buses stop? How would you treat those? Having no driveways, more like parking lots than driveways?
Or try to.
I mean, I don't know how you would eliminate designated stops in certain cases where several kids are getting on. Like if you pull in a neighborhood and there's 5 houses and the bus stops and all the kids jump out and they run to 5 different houses, you know, that's a designated stop. I think we need a little clarification.
I've got a question. Now, you're not, in this motion, you're not stating to revamp all of our drop-offs and pickups at each person's driveway, are you?
My
You're
purpose, my only purpose in this motion is to stop children from being let off the school bus and forced to walk home and the danger it involves. That is the only reason for that motion. Because we cannot guarantee a child's safety, and that should be our #1 priority, a child's safety, if we drop them off and they have to walk 3/10 of a mile home. We cannot guarantee that.
Why don't the parents pick them up?
I can't answer that. Don't know.
We can't guarantee that they're gonna run up the driveway out
That's
the back,
why we
out
have
the
a vote.
backyard to the neighbors.
That's why we're going to vote on it.
I agree. Anybody else? We have a motion and a second. Josh, would you like to comment?
I would love nothing more than to do that, but it's with some of our dead end roads that we have to drive, it's just not possible to turn the bus around. I can speak from experience, I have two myself. I can name several more. These drivers can name, several. It's, if there's no place to turn around, it is not safe practice to back a bus up. Whether it be 100 yards, 50 yards, you know, it's just not good, safe practice to do that. And if this policy, or this passes, that's what will have to happen in order for us to drop off. We will have to back buses out. And that is not safe for the kids on the bus or the driver. I would love to be able to do that. Don't get me wrong. And there's not a single driver back here that wouldn't love to be able to do that too. But with where children live on dead ends all over the county, I just don't see how it can be done.
Thank you. Go ahead, Brenda.
Mr. Atkins, is it not in our rules that if it is a turnaround in a driveway for children, that we help fix that turnaround?
Yeah, and I think preparing a turnaround is within the law. We can do that, and Mr. Rogers has done that before. But I think what he's saying, if the homeowner doesn't give permission, or the property owner doesn't give permission, and that bus goes down there, these bus drivers are going to have to back that bus a great distance rather than a swing in and back up.
I don't think that we're responsible for funding that turnaround.
Yeah.
We can help design and guide and give, tell them what we need in order to turn the bus around safely, but as of right now, we're not responsible for the funding of that.
Mr. Atkins.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Evans, would you state who we pay for bus turnarounds, fixing them?
I think we have provided like some gravel to assist with turnarounds and things in the past, yes.
When the bus is destroying that driveway and they're letting it, and if it's a big enough driveway that we can turn the bus around safely, and a bus weighs over 30,000 pounds. So obviously, continuously turning that weight around is going to cause some damage to a private driveway, and we have assisted in that over time.
Yeah. Any further questions or comments? Corey? Please call roll. Say the motion again.
Motion is that all children riding the school bus in Lawrence County will be picked up and returned to their driveways unless disciplinary action is enforced.
Call roll.
Weathers?
No.
Rochelle?
No.
Noddert?
No.
Mabry?
Aye.
Jacobs?
Yes.
Hartsfield?
No.
Dryden?
No.
Daniel?
No.
Caruso?
No.
2 yes, 7 no.
Motion fails. Dr. Mabry?
One more, Mr.
Thank you.
Crusoe. In regard to the survey that was given to the bus drivers, and that has been stated tonight, discipline is a major problem on school buses. Am I correct, Brother Gillum?
Yes, sir.
All right, my motion is, if a bus driver feels that they need a bus monitor to control behavior, they should submit a request to transportation supervisor. He then informs the director of schools. They conduct an investigation and determine if a monitor is warranted. If so, the director will report to the board to secure funding if needed.
Second.
Would you read the motion, please, for all four?
If a bus driver feels they need a bus monitor to control behavior, they should submit a request to the transportation supervisor. He then informs the director of schools. They conduct an investigation and determine if a monitor is warranted. If so, the director will report to the board to secure funding if needed.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any comments?
Who's responsible for the investigation?
I would figure Josh would be.
Josh and Mr.
Josh is driving the bus.
Be Josh and Mr. Atkins.
I mean, I'm in favor of done stated that we need to get attendance for our bus drivers, but I don't know that this is the way to do it, so, but I'll relinquish my statements.
Any further questions, comments? Oh, I'm sorry, Judge.
I think it's a good motion. The question that comes to my mind is funding. This is going to, this is inviting, I'd say most all bus drivers might quickly be submitting a request. And that's the issue I have with the motion. It's a great motion. But is it doable?
Go ahead, Brenda.
And we've sat here for 2.5, I don't know how long. And our whole thing has been about the safety of the kids. If the monitor's on the bus, gives the bus drivers more leeway to drive safely, they're not being deterred by all these kids and all, money shouldn't be a problem. We spend money on everything that comes along. Kids should be the first priority.
I agree with that statement. And again, I reemphasize, it's a great motion, and I suppose I'll vote yes for the motion, but is it doable?
Mr. Atkins.
Well, and I agree. I think having a bus attendant on every bus would be outstanding. I think it would help our drivers. For you folks that know buses and the drivers, they're looking up, they're looking out, they're looking up, they're looking out. They're having to deal with things happening behind them. And any of us that's drove 4 or 5 kids to a ball game knows that they're rambunctious, they're excited. Just imagine 50, 70, or 90 of those. The survey that we just administered to LCSS, we had 328 responses, various questions, things that we can do to recruit more drivers. Suggestions did include some bus attendants. I think we had less than 8 folks of the 328 that expressed an interest to serve as a bus attendant. Mr. Rogers, we have 66 buses, fully occupied, 65 buses, and we have how many attendants right now? Because we've added attendants over the last few years.
Well, I'm still trying to hire more,
Yeah.
but right now we have, well, there's one on every step bus, so there's 9 there. And then for Gen Ed, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 right now.
Yeah.
So
I have
we're
no,
rotating.
yeah, I think this board would fund that and not blink an eye. The problem will be finding people to do it. And that's a lot of folks. You're looking at another 50, 52, 53 attendants, and we had 8 out of 328 that we were interested in doing either a morning or an afternoon. That would take some work to find people. I don't know if they're out there. That would be my only concern with that, is the availability of folks.
Yeah, I want to add as well, I'll piggyback off of what Mr. Atkins says. We can put it in the policy, but if you can't find the folks, you just can't find the folks. We're lacking bus drivers to drive it. We're not going to find the people to monitor them. But it's not to say we can't put it in the policy. I mean, you can, it's just that's what, who I got? Over here, go ahead.
I got a question. We have policy on troublesome students now and things causing trouble. How's that working now? I mean, I don't know how's that working. What we already have in place, is that not working now?
Well, we have procedures in place, and it's actually in policy too. I think, and this is where I stand, and I talk to all of my drivers about it. You know, I feel that we have really lost the focus, or not really the focus, but we have lost the idea that riding a bus is a privilege. It's not really a right, and we need to be a lot quicker, I think, to when we have that consistent behavior issue. They need to be removed from the bus. And I understand coming from that side of it. Okay, I used to be a principal. Coming from that side of it, that's hard when that parent says, "Well, this is the only way I got to get to school." Okay, I get that, but I also am seeing it from another side now. When that same behavior child that's riding that bus is putting that whole bus at risk, they don't deserve to ride that bus. And I think we have got to be quicker to remove that child that is causing our issues and causing our safety issues as well. Now, I want monitors on buses too. I do. But I think that, you know, we've got to we got to look at, you know, if it's a consistent behavior issue, it's causing issues, they shouldn't have the right to ride that bus.
Nikki, go ahead.
I want to say this, if we need to, in my opinion, we need to clamp down on that first and get that solved first, and then if we still need the monitors, we go there, but until we take care of that, I don't know how the monitors.
Morris, did you have something? Did you have something, Morris? No?
I was just gonna say, if I was coming apply to drive a bus, I would much more likely take that job if I knew I had a second person, you know, on that bus too. I think it would actually help in recruiting bus drivers. Now, I agree that what Brenda was saying about safety, we're all about safety of those kids at all times. And you know, whatever we need to do, we're going to have to do that to keep them safe. And I kind of I agree with Nikki here that maybe we need to look at that, removing these kids as quicker or before, because honestly, I don't think the county commission is going to come up with any more money.
Brendan.
Well, from what I heard of the early comments from the bus drivers and from the survey, this is their biggest problem. And how are they going to control those kids that are acting off every day and putting them off and drive that bus at the same time? You got somebody on there to take that responsibility. It's going to take a lot off of them.
Corey.
I would dare say most bus drivers, if we had a policy, a strict behavioral policy in place, I think a lot of them, instead of us adding a second person, pay them the funds if we have it, but give them the extra money and discipline the kids that are causing a problem. I mean, that to me doesn't seem difficult. Give them what they need, more money, and allow them to do their job. If you can't, again, it needs to fall back to parents. If a parent can't make a kid act right on a bus, then they're gonna have to get them to school. And I don't think that's a hard decision.
Jerry.
I think we need to do both. I think we need to put the kids that won't behave off the bus, because like Mr. Rogers says, it's a privilege. So put them off the bus for X number of days till they can behave. Get the attention of some of these parents. If your kid's not going to behave, he or she's not going to ride this bus, period. I agree with Brenda. Kids or one of you, kids are going to act better if they have that second person on the bus. I remember one day riding a school bus, and the bus driver carried me back to the school. She said, "Mr. Dryden, I wish you'd ride my bus every day." Just having that second person on there would make a huge difference, you know. And I also agree with Mr. Neidert. I think it would even help in recruiting additional drivers, because I've had former drivers say, "I had enough of it. You know, I could not control the kids." So a combination of things: put the behavior problems off the bus, put somebody on there to help the drivers, and recruit more. So I'm ready to vote yes.
Moving on down the line, John, do you have anything?
I'm afraid of this motion passing, us putting a policy into place that we will immediately and forevermore be in violation of because we cannot adhere to it. We cannot get 62 assistants on all of these buses. We all want it, but we're fixing to vote to put that into policy, and starting out of the gate until the foreseeable future, we will be in violation of our own policy each and every year.
Well, that might bring up a question from Mr. Cagle. If should happen, we put it in policy and it doesn't, we don't get it. Are we violating? Are we, you know, are we breaking the law? Or we just don't have the people, but it's still in the policy, right?
It is, and you know, if I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, I can make a lot of hay out of that. In a trial where students are injured on a bus from, you know, roughhousing on a bus somewhere, we don't have a bus monitor on there. and suddenly some parent wants to sue because you're in violation of your own policy. What may be better to consider if you're intent on passing this motion is not to put it in policy, but just to take that as a motion, a business motion for this meeting, that we will look for and try to hire bus monitors rather than put it in policy.
Elaborate on that, because that's the first time I've heard.
But it's, rather than just amending policy, it just becomes a motion that was made at the meeting. That we look for and appropriate the funds to pay for a monitor for every school bus, rather than placing that in a policy or some other legal document. That's part of the minutes of this meeting.
Mr. Crusoe, I will change the motion to what Mr. Cagle has just said.
So I think first of all, we need to vote on the original motion that had a second.
I withdraw my motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to withdraw the first motion and the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? First motion amended. Dr. Braver, you still have the floor.
I move that we follow our legal counsel's advice and let him word the motion that needs to be presented.
That's smart.
That's what we paid him for.
I'll second. I don't think he was making a motion. I think he was making a suggestion that
Nobody elected me to anything.
Just been appointed.
Yeah, Dr. Mabry's motion, Mr. Chairman and ladies and gentlemen, if I might, should be worded something like this. We're not amending policy. It's just a general motion that's being considered by this board at this meeting. And that motion would be that the board appropriate funds and start the search process to put a bus monitor on every school bus in Lawrence County.
And I'll second that.
Let the record show in the minutes that Mr. Cagle made that motion, and we do have a second. Could you read that back, Jessica?
Yes, one moment.
Thank you, Mr. Cagle.
So if I have written correctly, it was to follow, Mr. Mabry's motion was to follow legal counsel advice, which Mr. Cagle stated for the Board of Education to appropriate funds and begin the search process to put a bus attendant on every bus in Lawrence County.
We have a second. Is that correct?
Can I just make a recommendation?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Strike out all that legal counsel advice. Dr. Mabry makes the motion that.
Sure.
Mabry
And that's
made
it.
the motion.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Second it.
We have a second. All in favor?
Can I make a comment? See, I think by doing this becomes a worthy goal of the board. And that's probably where we need to go, since we don't have any idea where the funding would come from.
Very well. All in favor? Say aye. All opposed? Let it records show that we will continue with that motion. Strive to continue with monitors on the bus.
Motion, we adjourn.
Before we adjourn,
Second.
before we adjourn, our next meeting is going to be this Thursday at 5:30. Brenda, do you have something to add?
Yes, sir. I would like for Mr. Atkins to report to us as he gets any new information on this as we progress, so we don't let this fall through the cracks, that we don't forget and get on everything else.
This is bus attendants is what you're recommending? Recommend bus attendants and
Finding funding for and hiring bus attendants for all buses. And if you could report back to us regularly, that way, as many things as comes up at this board, it won't fall through the cracks.
Does anybody have anything else before we adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn and a second.